supposed to carry on this series without this exciting plotline?
Oh, come on, you'll think of something.
I guess so, but I'm not good at this sort of thing. It's what my job's worth.
Look, mate, just think, okay?
Excuse me, everyone. I got to have a think.
You've gotta think harder than that, mate.
I am thinking harder. No, still nothing. Good grief. Maybe I overthunk it. What? Overthunk it? That's right, isn't it? No? Oh, I'm going crazy. Hello, yes, you guessed it right. I've returned to my old establishment for the Easter break and I'll be doing my revision videos from here now. Okay, how exciting. But we're going to be carrying on where we left off in the Acquisition of Behaviour series, and today we're going to be talking about animal territoriality and Stigmergy. Mostly animal territoriality. We'll touch on Stigmergy in the final minutes of the video. Okay, now most animals defend some sort of a territory, and this is done to obtain exclusive access to a particular set of resources, whether that be food, mates, a nesting habitat, all this sort of thing. Some animals only have territories at specific times of the year, such as the breeding season, right? So there's a lot of flexibility in when animals have territories, right? But having a territory is good because it allows you to navigate all the things we were talking about in the last video in a familiar environment. So this maximises food encounter, less competition from other conspecifics, for example, and also helps you get away from predators a bit better, because if you're in an environment which is familiar to you, you probably know all the best hiding spots. It's also useful in spatial learning, because if you encounter some novel spatial information, it can be rapidly assimilated because you're used to the environment that you're in, right? Okay, so let's start off with, what is a territory? We always like to start with a good definition, don't we? So, it's an area of space that an animal defends against intruders, usually conspecifics and members of their own species, right? So that's kind of obvious, we know that. And it often is a result of a trade-off between the need to patrol and the need to forage. Because obviously, an animal is maintaining a territory to, you know, keep all its food for itself, but there is a cost to that as well, because it means you've got to be constantly patrolling your territory, keeping away intruders, and that wastes a lot of energy. So it's a sort of a trade-off between the two things. Remember, the benefits versus the costs. Now, defending a territory doesn't necessarily involve direct defences, and we're going to be talking about some of the cues that animals use to defend their territories later in the video. And of course, territories sometimes are not established by the animal itself. Humans, I mean, we're quite common on this planet, and we create a lot of barriers in the environment, so we can isolate individuals that way. Now, it's also worth noting that the spacing of animals doesn't necessarily imply territorial behaviour. Animals can live in large densities and not be territorial, right? It's also important to note that these territories aren't static. They aren't there forever. They are constantly changing, contracting, expanding, changing in owners, you know, all these things. So it's a very dynamic system, these territories. Now, in 1934, a scientist called J.S. Huxley stated that territories can be defined like an elastic disc. Now, it's been a while since we had props in the series, but here I have an elastic band, and this is J.S. Huxley's elastic disc model, right? So, what Huxley stated, oh, I've lost the elastic band. So if you think of the inside of the elastic band as the territory, with changes in population density, the area of the territory can expand or contract. If there's a very large density of conspecifics, then you're going to have to reduce your territory size to fit everyone in, aren't you? But if there aren't many of your conspecifics around, then you can go crazy. You can afford to have more space, right? So you will expand your territory. Now, at very low population densities, you get things called buffer zones, which are boundaries between territories, and these are not occupied by anybody. And people have used computer simulations to represent these formations. Now, a great study by Barlow, not Gary Barlow, oh no, wouldn't it be great if he was a scientist? No, by Barlow and his colleagues, he was a scientist, and he studied a bird called the American dunlin in Alaska in two different locations. Okay, Barrow and Colemark. Now these two different locations are two different population densities. In Colemark, there was a much higher population density. So the elastic discs contracted, okay, and got smaller in size and they packed together. Whilst in Barrow, they were more spaced out, right? Now in a place called Colemark, when you have several elastic discs all together, trying to expand as much as possible to have as much space as possible, then what you see is that you form hexagonal shapes, which I can't form with my hand because I've only got 5 fingers, so you've got a pentagon there. That's because hexagons are perfect for maximising the possible area you can have, because they all interlock together. And this is also shown in cichlid fish territories, because everyone studies cichlid fish. And hexagons are everywhere in nature. If you think about honeycomb structure in honeybees, each little cell in a honeycomb is a hexagon because it's maximising the amount of space possible. There you go, hexagons are the key to life. Now Huxley's elastic discs have been very useful in developing modelling patterns for these sort of situations, but they don't tell us why animals defend territories. Tinbergen did that, but he didn't ask when it was actually feasible for an animal to defend a territory, when it was actually worth it, and when it wasn't. So for that, someone else had to come in. So we're going to have to get rid of the elastic bands for the moment, because here comes Jem Brown and the rather dull looking name, Principle of Economic Defendability. Because obviously defending a territory has loads of costs. Violent behaviour can result in injury, which obviously isn't very good. Producing scent marking might have a metabolic cost, and calling may attract the attention of predators. So a lot of things. So once again, it's benefits versus costs. So let's say the benefit in this case of maintaining a territory is food availability, right? I'm going to draw a little graph now. So we're going to have food availability on the x-axis, and on the y-axis we've got benefit slash cost. What that basically means is how much of a benefit you're getting, okay, or how much of a cost you're getting. Now for benefits, so with increased food availability, there's an increased benefit, obviously, but it plateaus. So it increases up to a certain point where there's no further increase. But that's because the animal can't physically deal with that amount of food, right? Imagine, right, you really want some sweets and your grandma gives you 1 jelly baby. That isn't going to be very good, is it? But if she gives you 5 jelly babies, that's great, right? You increase benefits, right? If she gives you a whole pack of jelly babies, yeah, increase benefits. If she gives you a whole sweet shop, right, then there's no way you're going to actually be able to physically process that. So the benefit stays the same, it plateaus off, right? Now the cost, on the other hand, is a very different pattern. Of course it increases with increased food availability, but it has a different graphical function. This increases exponentially. So, like that, right? And anything, let me just label that B and that C for benefits and costs. So anything underneath the benefit line and above the cost line is when it's economically profitable to defend and have a territory, okay, as stated by Jem Brown. So this is when it's advantageous to undergo some sort of defensive mechanism. Once the costs exceed the benefits, then that animal must question whether it's worth defending a territory, right? Now in general, as territory size increases, the costs associated with that also increases, which makes sense because you've got a larger area to defend, right? So this is a very useful model in determining optimal territory size. It also states that animals in poorer environments, so in general poorer food, for example maybe lower in nutrients or something, those individuals can have larger territories. And that's because the costs associated with them are lower. And this was studied up in the tropics on the golden-winged sunbird, which is a lovely looking bird. Go and look it up, it's lovely. And what they did, they took metabolic measurements in calories per hour, right, of the birds doing 3 activities. And that was perching, foraging, and defending their territory. They made a qualitative assessment of the quality of the territory by measuring the nectar content of the flowers in that territory, because these are nectar-feeding flowers. Yeah. Did I just say nectar-feeding flowers? I meant nectar-feeding birds. Am I getting crazy? And they then measured how long it took for the birds to get enough energy within that territory, right? And they found that birds with good territories spent less time foraging because they needed to spend more time defending their territories and using all that energy. And this increases their availability to the nectar in each flower. So therefore, defending a territory means the birds have an increased availability to the nectar in each flower, right? Now this was studied quantitatively, and it was shown that the net benefit was only 52 calories, right? So there's 52 calories in this, it's a net gain of energy, but when you think about it, it's not that much. And they also showed that the territory was just about economically defendable if the nectar content of the flowers exceeded 2 microliters. If it was less than that, then it just wasn't worth it. The flowers were just too poor. It wasn't worth defending a load of, quite frankly, shit flowers. So from that we can see that there is an optimal territory size. Now what a guy called Carpenter did was actually calculate what that optimal territory size is, right? And he did that with these rufous hummingbirds, beautiful little things, right? And these are migratory species, they're solitary, and similarly to the experiment on the sunbirds, Carpenter measured how many flowers there were in a certain territory rather than the nectar content of the flowers, but still kind of similar, right? And so these are migratory, so they move between different territories on different days, right? Day 3, they went to, a really posh place, like a 5-star hotel in rufous hummingbird terms, right? There was loads of flowers there, loads of food, right? And they measured the weight gain of those hummingbirds. That was all right, but on days 4 and 5, they moved to a place which was okay, like maybe a 2-star restaurant, and so there was a little bit less food there, but the maximum weight gain was reached in these areas. So they gained more from staying in areas where there was little less food, because if you go to places where there's more food, then you have to defend that territory more, right? There's an increased chance of there being intruders, so you've got to be, on the lookout, which is energetically expensive. Now something we haven't mentioned is that not all territories are defended by a single individual. Now we all know robins are extremely territorial, and in the breeding season you usually have a pair of robins in a territory, a breeding pair. And obviously having more than one of you, well for a start, is very advantageous because more eyes, to look out for potential intruders. And, well, if you're a pair, then you want to defend the both of you, because it's both of your genes that you're passing on, right? There's also be some economic benefits of defending a resource. And this was shown in pied wagtails, which are delightful little birds. Originally, they used to feed near riverbanks, but you can find them pretty much anywhere now, even in our cities, right? And what you often see is the pied wagtail feeding on the riverbank, and he's got a pal behind him, right? And what they do, they do little circuits around their territory, right? And the whole thing takes about, let's say, 40 minutes to go round the whole territory, picking up insects and worms and whatnot, yeah? And his mate is following 20 minutes behind, okay, eating. So they're going round and round and round the territory, right? Now, although the pied wagtails are probably getting less food from that. But, I mean, they've got increased defences. They've increased number of eyes looking out for potential intruders to chase anyone else off. Okay? Now, as food abundance decreases, so as territory quality decreases, then perhaps it's not worth it to have a pal on board. So there might come that awkward moment when one pied wagtail says to the other pied wagtail, "Sorry, this can't go on anymore." Just imagine how awkward that would be for the poor pied wagtail! Now, territorial marks are used by animals to maintain a territory, and they can involve a whole load of visual, acoustic and olfactory cues, and we're going to go through them now. So firstly, visual cues. Now, you can have stasis optical cues, and this is just the sheer presence of the individual, okay? You also get dynamic optical cues. So this is where there's a particular signalling feature of the organism that the animal uses. Okay, so the right claw on fiddler crabs, right, is a dynamic optical cue. Okay, so it's not the whole body, it's a specific part of the body that it's using. Now, eagle owls, arguably one of the most impressive birds of prey on Earth, use visual cues to defend their territory. They have a white throat patch which they display at dawn and dusk, right? And they were studied in the lab where individual owls were shown a model owl, right? And they looked at their response, right? And they showed that there was the greatest response was when a male was shown, a male stuffed owl. Okay? Okay, so that means that that eagle owl was really pumped up. He really wanted to do something and maybe fight for that territory. Okay? Now, acoustic cues we've talked about before. We made loads of examples in the second video and in the fifth video, so in order to get my extra view, why not skip back to them and have a look? Right, olfactory cues then. Right, a good example was done on wall lizards. Again, probably not the first thing that would spring to mind when you think about olfactory cues. Right, now they release a scent from the femoral glands on their back legs. Okay, lovely. And the more scent there is, then that gives females an indication, because it's only males that secrete this, that gives females an indication on how big their territory is. And how big their territory is important because that means there's more space to sit out and bask in the sun, get a nice tan. You know what I'm saying? Now, Heathcote et al. Were a bit sneaky. They altered the pheromone profile of these wall lizards. Okay, so they made the females think that the lizards were of a higher quality. And that was done by basically giving them a greater space to bask in, right? What they found is that females preferred males with greater territory sizes. And this was done through tongue flick trials, which basically says what it says on the tin. So they counted how many times they flicked their tongue. And that's a good sign, because that means they're into you. Okay, so if a wall lizard ever does that to you, you're in. And this was done by presenting the females with the scent of the male on a stick. Right? High-tech stuff this was. So olfactory cues then are very, very useful, because it means that you don't have to be constantly patrolling around your territory looking for intruders. You can just leave a mark there, and that communicates a whole load of stuff to all the other conspecifics in the area. It gives a whole load of information. Now, when a foreign scent becomes inactive in a specific location, so if it goes off, the scent isn't as strong, that means that other individuals can move in and set up that new territory, because that probably means that the individual, you know, who was once maintaining that territory has probably croaked or something like that, is no longer there, okay? Because he's no longer maintaining it. So, these territories are dynamic. We've said that a load of times. They're constantly changing in size, who owns them. All these things are changing over time. And a great example of this was done in my second home, Bristol. And this was shown in the fox population in Bristol. And let me tell you, there are loads of foxes in Bristol, absolutely everywhere. And in the 90s, there was an epidemic of mange in these foxes, right? Luckily not anymore. And a load of Bristol academics, including one of my lecturers, Stephen Harris, wanted to study the dynamics of these territories. So Guglioli, Potts and Harris applied Huxley's elastic disk model and a whole load of other computer mathematical modelling to study the dynamics of the fox population. And they showed as the population declined, territory spaces were taken up by other individuals, so there was evidence of expansion. Unless there were less individuals in an area, a lower population density, the foxes spent less time scent marking, which is understandable, and this proves Huxley's elastic disk, oh god, don't know why I almost said that, elastic disk hypothesis, right? And because of these buffer zones. Remember what we were talking about, those boundaries where no one lives. Okay, lastly then, we're going to talk a little bit about Stigmergy, and this is particularly relevant to social insects, right? Now when you look at an insect colony, the individuals look as if they work as if they were on their own, right? Whilst their collective activities appear to be coordinated, yeah? So, for example, nest formation and all this stuff. That's what Stigmergy is, so it's indirect coordination through stimulus-response associations. And the term was coined by Pierre Paul Grasset, okay? Brilliant name. An ant or a termite goes about doing its daily business, it leaves a trail of pheromones, which is picked up by another ant, which also leaves its trail of pheromones, and another ant, and another ant. So there's continuous communication going on between the individual ants. Also seen in termites, right? So what you have is a positive feedback mechanism going on here. All these subsequent actions tend to reinforce and build on each other, right? The response gets bigger and bigger. There are 4 essential features to any stigmergic process, okay? And here are the 4 of them now. So, the first is multiple interactions. Sense, doesn't it? Because the more interactions you have, that means the more individuals you have. You need to have more than one individual because then you wouldn't have a colony, right? Obvious. Now, the second thing is negative feedback, probably something which you've come across before. The time to remark an old scent mark is too high. So there's a big gap, okay, to remark. That means that colony will decrease in size. So the territory size would decrease. Yeah, got it? And the opposite is true if the if the time since remarking was too small. Okay, that territory size would get bigger. Okay. Now, third thing is positive feedback, and we just talked about that. As a scent fades out, that means there's less individuals. Less individuals pick up the scent, so then the population decreases and decreases, so that colony has moved on somewhere else. However, if there's a lot of pheromone put down, then the reverse is true. That means more insects pick up that scent, which release more pheromone, and these will be picked up by another insect, which release more pheromone, so it's a positive feedback. Yeah. Now, the fourth thing is noise amplification. What does that mean? It's all about the movement of the individual animals, because there's randomness in the movement of the individual animals, and this generates fluctuations of the territorial boundaries. These fluctuations propagate throughout the population, affecting the boundaries of where your colony actually is. Okay? Right, so that's a little bit on Stigmergy. That's all I've got time for today. Next time we're going to get on to really cool stuff. We're going to start talking about social learning. Hopefully we're doing a nice bit of social learning now. We're interacting, aren't we? Admittedly, I can't hear a word you're saying. Don't even try and reply. I can't hear you. You're an idiot! Bye.